So a couple months ago, the Civilian Marksmanship Program, also known as the CMP, showed off some of their newly made M1 receivers at the CMP Western Games in Phoenix, Arizona. They were in a pretty early state in the white with very obvious tool marks from the CNC path, but they still generated a lot of hype and a lot of questions as they made the rounds on social media. Today, the 21st of May, the CMP released an article answering a lot of those questions about the M1s. So in true social media parasite fashion, I'm going to simply rehash and summarize an article that someone has already written and you could probably just read yourself. The original article will be linked in the description if you are interested. I did leave a few things out, so you may want to read the article anyways. So let's just start with some background so everyone understands what we're talking about. We're talking about the CMP making new M1 Garands, and particularly the receiver, which is this part right here. This is pretty much the heart of the M1 rifle. It's easily the most complex and difficult part to produce, and legally speaking here in the United States, is the only part of the rifle that is actually considered a firearm. And by the way, just so we're clear, this is not one of the newly made CMP M1 Garand receivers. This is a receiver made by Beretta in Italy. Shout out to Matt over at Fudbusters for getting this to me. Now, some people might be confused as to why it's a big deal that the CMP is making new reproductions, because the common misconception out there is that M1 Garand reproductions are commonplace when they're really not. Pretty much 99% of the M1s you see out there are actual original US government issue M1 Garands because, well, they made over 6 million of them. Now, it's taken some time for those guns to be repatriated over the years, and really a large chunk of them were basically destroyed or rendered unserviceable over the last 80 plus years. But in times where there have been droughts of surplus US government issue M1 Garands, like the 90s for example, some companies did in fact make reproduction M1 Garand receivers. For example, one of those companies was Springfield Armory Incorporated, a company based out of Illinois, most known for importing Croatian firearms, not to be confused with the defunct US government arsenal, Springfield Armory from Springfield, Massachusetts. Springfield Armory Inc., along with a few other companies over the years, made some reproduction M1s back in the late 80s and 90s at a time where getting US government issue M1 Garands was very difficult, and so a reproduction was financially viable for a company to produce and sell at a price point that could make a profit. Fast forward to the 2000s and 2010s, and we received a massive influx of repatriated Lend-Lease M1 Garands from Greece, Denmark, and the Philippines, as well as the CMP, formerly known as the Director of Civilian Marksmanship, massively relaxing the restrictions on getting an M1 Garand from them. All of this combined to basically kill off the market for reproduction M1s at that point in time. Now, a lot of, if not all of those reproduction M1s in the past were manufactured on cast receivers, which in an M1 Garand or M14 style rifle is generally considered to be an inferior manufacturing method to what the original US government spec called for, which was a forged steel receiver. Basically, the difference is instead of pouring a molten liquid metal into a mold that's roughly the shape of the receiver and then letting that solidify, which is casting, a forging process beats a heated chunk of steel into roughly the right shape of the receiver before it cools down and then gets machined to final dimension. This essentially means that the grain of the steel is already running in line with the shape of the final part, and in certain designs, like an M1 receiver for example, can result in a significantly stronger and more durable finished part. A cast part will have more of a random grain structure, and in some parts that's not desirable. So all of that background is to say that the new product the CMP will be offering is a forged steel receiver machined by Heritage Arms in Oxford, Alabama. And according to the CMP, they have worked with Heritage Arms in the past to make parts for them. Presumably that would be their newly produced gas cylinders, which they've been putting on some of their M1s in the last few years. Now, when they said Heritage Arms in the article, I had kind of an initial negative reaction because I think most of us know that company mainly as the importer of cheap pot metal guns from Brazil, but it looks like those receivers are actually being made in Oxford, Alabama, which is like right down the street from the CMP in Anniston, Alabama. Now, as far as the complete rifles go, the CMP says that there'll be a mix of commercial and USGI parts with major components like the stock and barrel mainly being commercial components. The CMP goes on to explain why they're doing this. They give 3 reasons, but honestly, there's only one real reason, and it's the first one that's given. The stocks of original USGI M1 Garands will obviously not last forever, so they're trying to get ahead of the eventual point where they run out of the original M1 Garands to sell and put this product to market before then. It would be really foolish of them to wait until they're completely out of USGI guns to then start producing new ones. And if you aren't aware, the CMP is not a for-profit company, and in fact, its main function is not to distribute U.S. surplus arms and ammunition. It is to support and host a wide variety of marksmanship programs and competitions. However, I would presume that the largest source of their income comes from the sale of M1s. So if the M1s dry up without them having any product to replace them with, well, then the CMP simply won't be able to function in the capacity that it does today. And if you've ever shot at any of their facilities like the CMP Talladega Marksmanship Park in Talladega, Alabama, or Camp Perry, Ohio, the national matches, you'll know that they run some excellent facilities and of course facilitate my primary sport, which is bullseye pistol shooting. Now, additional stated reasons why they went with making new M1s versus something else. They already have a trained armorer staff that's very familiar with inspecting, engaging, and assembling M1 Garands. And of course, the CMP has just been associated with M1 Garands for so long that it made sense. But the most interesting thing they said is that they intend to produce some quote-unquote interesting variants. Now, I know me personally, I'm kind of a heathen and that I like retro modded stuff as long as I'm not like cutting up an original gun. So newly made M1 receivers sound like a great opportunity for making BM59s, for example, which were basically just a modification of an M1 Garand receiver. So now with these, you would be able to make a BM59 without cutting up an original receiver, and it would be a nice forged part instead of some cast thing. Now, after this part of the article, they went on to say that they are not running out of USGI M1 Garands at this present time, and they are still in the process of repatriating additional USGI M1 Garands. Of course, the number of US government issue M1 Garands, though, is finite, and they eventually will run out. They then go on to discuss variants. As of right now, the first rifles that are going to be sold are planned on being 30-06 and 308 standard M1 Garand configuration, but they say they hope to bring quote-unquote other historically relevant variants to market. I'd be really interested in seeing what they have in the works. I know that when I spoke to their head armorer a few years ago, Lucas, he said they put together a 6.5 Creedmoor M1 in their custom shop. I personally put together a 6.5 by 55 Swede M1 Garand in my shed. So I'd be interested to see if the CMP is thinking about offering other calibers besides 30-06 and 308, or maybe just other US government variants like the M1D Sniper and the M1C Sniper variants. Maybe even a tanker variant, even though that wasn't a real historical configuration. Right now, they're pricing them at $1,900 new plus $40 shipping. With that, you get a big hard case to go with it. They then say other future variants will have different pricing, as well as early serial numbers might have different pricing. They also are going to auction off the first 100 serial numbers. Now, unlike the surplus M1 Garands, these will not be shipped straight to your door. These are a commercial product and will have to go through an FFL like most anything else. And they will also be available at the CMP North location at Camp Perry, Ohio, and at the CMP Talladega Marksmanship Park. The CMP plans to have these out by the summer and say that if you are going to be attending the national matches at Camp Perry, Ohio, which is in July, they plan to have these rifles available then, which is actually a really fast turnaround from when they announced these to actually having a product that you can go out and get. I'm going to be at the national matches this year, so I'm definitely going to go ahead and check out those rifles and probably make some videos about them. I would like to get one here for testing and evaluation, and I have been speaking to a few people at the CMP about that, but for now we'll have to wait and see how that pans out. The CMP also states that they are available for pre-order. You can find out more information about that in the actual article itself. So the last part of the article just kind of talks about a few more niche things. They talk about how they have adjusted the CMP's high power and games competition rules to accommodate these new M1s. They also made some specific ammo recommendations that you stick to M2 ball or a similarly loaded ammo that's made specifically for the Garand. My personal opinion is that if I want to shoot some hotter 30-06, I either take the gas plug out or I have an adjustable gas plug and I just use that. Last but not least, they talk about how some people had questions about the ridges they could see on the finish of the receivers. Those are just tool marks left over from the CNC path. You'll see it on pretty much anything made using CNC machining, and of course, those early prototypes were rough and unfinished. The CMP confirms, though, that the finished product will not have those very obvious tool marks, which means they're probably just going to bead blast them out and then parkerize the receivers, which makes sense to me. In fact, you can even see on this Italian receiver that there's still some tool marks here on the heel of the receiver, so it's just one of those things. Anyway, if you want to read the full article, go ahead and check it out in the description below. I did leave a few things out. Go ahead and check out my other video on the CMP M1 Garands if you haven't already seen it. Last but not least, I want to talk about my channel sponsor, Michael Scott Earl. Michael Scott Earl is a New York Times best-selling author known for a wide variety of genres and novels. The series that I'm currently reading is his sci-fi action-adventure series called Star Justice. If that sounds like something that interests you, you can get the first book for free by following the link on screen in the description or in the pinned comment. Thank you to Michael Scott Earl for sponsoring this video. Thank you to all of my channel members for directly supporting the channel. You too can become a channel member by clicking the join button next to the subscribe button, and thank you all for watching.